welcome to the African Exodus show. I am your host, Tierney Cherie, here to you with a new video. Before we get started with today's African News segment, to remind you all, if you want to stay connected outside of YouTube, there are two ways you can do so. The first way is the free way. You can stay connected through the Telegram app. There I post every video that I do on YouTube. In addition, if I want to share anything with the people, maybe there's something that I don't feel at liberty to discuss on YouTube, that's another way we can stay connected. In addition, you could also support this channel through my Patreon channel. There I will also post a weekly exclusive just for you. With that, let's get started with this week's African and World News. The war on Palestinian people, Israel's war on Palestinians, is raging on. And since the beginning of the war, a number of countries have essentially severed relations with Israel or just lessened their diplomatic ties. Two of those countries are South Africa and Chad. So let's discuss. South Africa recalls ambassador diplomatic mission to Israel and accuses it of genocide. South Africa's government has recalled Monday its ambassador and diplomatic mission to Israel in condemnation of the bombardment of the Gaza Strip, calling it a genocide. The government also threatened action against the Israeli ambassador to South Africa over his recent remarks on the African country's stance on the Israel-Hamas war. No further details were given about the remarks. The war broke out after the Palestinian militant group Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, leaving over 1,400 people dead. More than 10,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israel's military offensive in Gaza, according to the Hamas-run health ministry there. The South African government decided to withdraw all its diplomats in Tel Aviv for consultation, according to the minister in the presidency. She said that the cabinet noted the disparaging remarks of the Israeli ambassador to South Africa about those who are opposing the atrocities and genocide of the Israeli government, and added that the Department of International Relations was instructed to take necessary measures within the diplomatic channels and protocols to deal with his conduct. Now, it was also remarked that the position of the ambassador in the country was untenable. Lastly, Israel criticized the Latin American countries last week and called on Colombia and Chile to explicitly condemn the Hamas terrorist organization. I always get so shocked by the gall of Israel, because how are you in the position to tell a country to condemn your enemies? But this is the same type of arrogance. This is the same type of boastfulness that we see coming from the West. And don't be confused. Israel is the West. Don't be confused about them trying to mask themselves as being a so-called Middle Eastern or Arabian country. That is the West. That is a plan of the West in order to have surveillance in a region that has been very antagonistic towards Western interests for a long time. So we don't know what was said by the Israeli ambassador in South Africa, but I'm sure it's something akin to what was said from the ambassador Israeli government officials who have lambasted the international community who has stood with the Palestinian people. It's interesting, though, because South Africa has always been consistent on this issue. They've always been consistent that they have an antagonistic relationship with the Israeli government because of their condition of apartheid. Not to mention, they've always been consistent in that they stood with Palestinian people. So seeing that being the case, what more would Israel expect from a country like South Africa? By the way, if you don't know, Israel as a country supported apartheid, one of the many things that they supported that are antagonistic to African interests. So that was the first country. We also had Chad, which I believe actually preceded severing ties with their ambassador. So Chad recalls ambassador to Israel over unprecedented deadly violence in the Gaza Strip. Authorities in Chad have announced the withdrawal of the country's envoy in Israel for consultation over what the officials described as an unprecedented deadly violence in the Gaza Strip. Authorities in Chad have announced the withdrawal of the country's envoy in Israel for consultation over what officials described as unprecedented deadly violence in the Gaza Strip. The country's Foreign Affairs Ministry said in a statement that the government condemned the loss of human lives of many innocent civilians and called for a ceasefire, leading to a lasting solution to the Palestinian question. The African country now joined Turkey, Chile, Bahrain, Honduras, Colombia, and Jordan to recall their ambassadors to Israel. Chad, a Muslim-dominated country, had cut ties to Israel, had its ties cut to Israel since 1972, but it normalized ties in 2019. The country is the first in Africa to recall its envoy from Israel since the start of the retaliatory offensive that began in Gaza. So this is important to note that Chad is essentially a holdout. You know, the reason why they hadn't had normalized relations with the Israeli government, they were one of the few holdouts as far as African countries who still maintained the policy that was adopted by the Organization of African Unity towards Israel, towards that apartheid state, that state would never have a welcoming presence in the African continent. This is what the forefathers of the movement for liberation stood on, that state would never have a welcoming in and out presence, being able to be friendly like Israel has been with other countries. Now, Chad is interesting. I want to talk more about the fact that they, in 2019, renewed relations with Israel. This is something that we've been seeing in recent years. I've been talking about this, that Israel more and more, despite their previous relationship with the African Union or the Organization of African Unity, one that supposedly disavowed Zionism, Israel has been campaigning in order to be a top country inside of Africa, being able to have extremely friendly relations inside of Africa. Even we remember Israel was trying to be an observer at the African Union, and Chad being willing to have these relations in 2019 with Israel after a long held stance that it would not try to make friendly with a Zionist regime, was one of many countries who capitulated to Western demands, capitulated and honestly sold out the cause. Because if you look at what African countries have been doing over and over again with Israel and with other Western countries, those countries that supposedly were so much about liberation forgot all of that. As soon as some economic benefits came their way, so did the idea that we are going to stand against this country that, again, has been antagonistic to our own interests since we started asserting our liberation inside of the world. So let's just read through this article. This is from 2023. February 2023. Chad to open an embassy in Israel on Thursday, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu had put out. So it says Chad had severed its ties with Israel in 1972 after the Organization of African Unity, the predecessor of the current African Union, issued a decision to its member states to cut diplomatic ties with Israel in solidarity with the Palestinians. But in November 2018, former Chadian President Idris Deby, the late father of the current leader, paid a historic visit to Israel during which he spoke of the two countries committing a new era of cooperation. Netanyahu then visited Chad in January 2019, while the following year, Israel signed normalization agreements with Morocco, Bahrain, Sudan, United Arab Emirates as part of a broad diplomatic push by the United States under President Donald Trump. The agreements enraged Palestinians, who condemned them as stabs in the back amid fear that they will weaken a long-standing pan-Arab position calling for Israeli withdrawal from territories it occupies illegally in acceptance of Palestinian statehood in return for normal ties with Arab countries. So this is so interesting when you think about it. A country like Chad, which had long, held on to the idea that they were not going to normalize relationships with Israel just based on Palestinian solidarity. And again, if you look up the history of Israel and Africa, they've always been a stooge of the United States imperialism. So that basis has also motivated African leaders to keep their distance. But as has happened since the years of glorious liberation, where everyone was clear about who their enemies were, new people come in power, old leaders have died, and since then, new people come in who want to have favorable reputation with international interests, particularly ones that have economic benefits to them personally. So the fact that Chad, after a long position from 1972 to 2019, that they would not support the Israeli country, that they would not have diplomatic relations with Israel, basically put their guards down in 2019 and was willing to normalize relationships with them shows you how hard Israel has been working in order to get Africa and other countries, particularly Arab countries, on their side and to strengthen their position in the world. Now, we see a lot of that being damaged as a result of their onslaught on the Palestinian people. Will this last, though? I mean, you see, like we just mentioned, how quickly were African and Arab leaders willing to sell out the Palestinians when this war is over? Despite the fact that Israel's taking a hit now, will Israel still be taking a hit in the end? And my personal conviction is that this, for the moment, discuss with Israel and Zionism, for many people, for many nations, is just for the moment. Soon as they see that the temperature has cooled off, that the violence have died down, you will see many of the same leaders who sold out the Palestinian cause, sold out their own cause, the African liberation cause, go right back to a country like Israel. Don't think that Israel's going away. Israel has a purpose to fulfill in this world. And what they're doing goes directly to that purpose, to create and lead in and usher in a new world government that's going to be encompassing of everyone. One that they're going to be parading around saying that peace is on earth, even though this peace is not going to be true peace. It's only peace that the enemy, that the world can deliver to us. So there's a long, not just history, a future that we still have to contend with when it comes to the Israeli government. And I'm very sure many of these people who are willing to sell out their cause of the Palestinians or of their own people are going to do so soon as this war dies down. So with that, let's go to the next story. So I want to go back to the story that we spoke about, I believe, a couple weeks ago, that Ethiopia was campaigning in order to get access to the Red Sea. Ethiopia being a powerful African country, but not the most powerful African country, being one of the countries, the only other African country other than South Africa that is a member of BRICS. This same Ethiopia has been trying to get access to the Red Sea because being a landlocked country, that significantly depletes their ability to exert authority over the region and over the world. Now, I want to go back to this because some information has come out that has led some people to think that Abiy Ahmed might be of the persuasion that war is on the table as far as meeting that end. So this article is from Al Jazeera. It says, is landlocked Ethiopia starting another war over ports in the Horn of Africa? On October 26th, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed denied reports that his government was planning to wage war to gain access to a seaport. It was his second attempt in as many weeks at reassuring neighboring states in the Horn of Africa that his pursuit of a new import gateway of Ethiopia would stay peaceful. Our army has never taken the initiative to invade another country in its history, and we won't start now, Abiy said during festivities marking the 116th anniversary of the Ethiopian Army's establishment in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. On certain issues that Ethiopia seeks dialogue over, it is being said that a military invasion is a possibility. I'd like to make it clear that there is nothing that we seek to accomplish using force or an invasion. But it is unclear if his latest remarks will cool months of uneasiness felt across the region. During another televised speech earlier this month, the Prime Minister cited demographic ties and maps dating back to the 3rd century kingdom of Ascom to invoke Ethiopian territorial claims to the Red Sea ports in Eritrean territory, and said the question of Red Sea access was an existential issue. Since Eritrea's independence, Ethiopia's primary trade conduit has been the Red Sea port of Djibouti, but that hasn't come cheap. Djibouti charges Ethiopia over $1 billion annually in port fees, a huge sum for a country where nearly a fifth of the population of 119 million people is still dependent on food aid. But Addis Ababa's tone has become increasingly assertive, similar to that used by Ethiopian officials when discussing the construction of the massive Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Nile River. 150 million people cannot reside in a geographical prison, Abiy said in his October 13th address on the port issue, citing Ethiopia's projected population figure by 2030. Whether you like it or not, the prison will blast somewhere. Despite this, local media reports from July asserted that Abiy told a private gathering of local businessmen that the option of military force remained on the table in the event of the failure of negotiations to secure port access with neighboring countries. Abiy didn't refute the reports for months, and even after they were featured in an Al Jazeera Inside Story episode weeks later. So I had not been aware that he had made these remarks supposedly in July and did not refute them. That's significant. If Ethiopia is willing to go to war in order to get access to a seaport, would have to be with Eritrea, we would assume, if not Djibouti. If Ethiopia were to do that, obviously that would significantly weaken the idea of peace in the region. A lot of people were parading that Ethiopia and Eritrea had achieved a type of peace, basically being allies and being willing to come together in order to fight the TPLF. But this achievement could be very quickly undone if Ethiopia is not given access to the Red Sea port. Now, I did say in the previous video, in my opinion, I absolutely see Ethiopia's claim to the Red Sea as being one that has a lot of credibility because Ethiopia, the colonial borders that separated Eritrea and Ethiopia were not drawn by Africans. That separation was done under the Italian occupation of Eritrea. And prior to that, Ethiopia was not a landlocked country. It was a country that absolutely had access to the Red Sea. So this is something that I think is significant. I absolutely understand that this is an issue that will not go away. And if you're talking about these massive import fees of over $1 billion for a country of like Ethiopia that's really struggling, you would really, really hope and pray. Why can't our African brothers and sisters come together and to the negotiation table and have a real faithful negotiation, a way to make way for your brothers and sisters who you see struggling because of geographical limitations? And I just want to assert again, Djibouti, who has more military bases, more foreign military bases than any other country in the world. This country has been raping Ethiopia, taking advantage of the fact that they are landlocked. And I think also Djibouti probably feels empowered by the fact that they do have more foreign military bases in their country than any other country in the world because they feel like, well, of course Ethiopia won't attack us, not when the United States and Saudi Arabia and France and Russia, everyone has a military base in our country. They would be foolish to do so. So I do think that there's a lot of bad faith on the part of these neighboring African countries. And clearly, the idea of African unity has been far from realized, despite the fact some people have lip game, want to talk about the idea that we're all one Africa, that we can come together. If you cannot come up with a dignified way to give your brothers and sisters something that they need in order to allow stability and peace to continue in the region, then yeah, African unity as the concept is long and far from being realized. So with that, let's go to the next story. Okay, I want to do some follow-up talks about Minister Louis Farrakhan's lawsuit against the Anti-Defamation League, also known as the ADL. I want to talk about the history of a certain people who have acted as surveillance inside of our community. Now, let me be more careful about words that I use because, as we know, it's a very tense time, and certain people have been said to be persecuted widely right now. And because of that, I'm very sure that YouTube guidelines are going to be coming down hard on people who want to talk about certain people. So we're going to be careful in what terminology we use. And I advise you all to do the same in your comments and in your discussions in the chat. So like Farrakhan, Dr. King attracted Ish people opposition. The story goes on to say, for starters, Dr. King was spied on by Ish people leaders of the NAACP. Now, I wanted to start here now with this article. And by the way, this article, I forgot to say, was written by The Final Call. A lot of people try to write the final call off, but they do such good uh, digging inside of different histories. And so definitely do not write them off, all because they have a smear campaign that has been done against them in the NOI. But this goes back to the NAACP, an organization that we're always told, hey, everyone, Ish people were there with us when we started this organization. And then you have to wonder, why was an organization like the NAACP instrumental in taking down radical Black leaders, people like a Marcus Garvey, people even like a Dr. King? There was a point where Dr. King was being lambasted by people who were his peers because he started taking a more affirmative stance that we absolutely had to have freedom, not just political rights to vote. We had to have self-determination. Whenever he started changing his rhetoric from, please help us, and then started demanding things, whenever he started agitating the powers that be, you saw a lot of the Black boule come in and conspire against him, like they have done against many of our leaders throughout history. So it says, for starters, Dr. King was spied on by Ish people leaders of the NAACP. Joel Spingarn, whom the NAACP's Spingarn Award is named after, was a spy for the U.S. military. Yes, you should ask the NAACP, if you are a member, why someone who was a spy of Dr. Martin Luther King has an award named after them. You should ask the NAACP if you're a member, or if you have any type of connection to the national branch. You should ask them why. So he specialized in spying on so-called radical Blacks and others the military had deemed subversive. The Nation of Islam's research group website notes, Spingarn was hired in May of 1918 and given the rank of major in the military intelligence division. Spingarn ran a small unit of undercover agents who were looking for proof of subversion. The MID opened 100,000 pieces of mail a week and monitored Black publications. According to the Memphis Commercial Appeal, the documents show Spingarn, who remained NAACP chairman during his tenure at MID, used his post to obtain critical information for MID, such as a list of the organization's 32,000 members. So when I said last week that Ish people who want to use a role in the civil rights movement as being justification for their continual admiration inside of our community, they don't want to talk about the fact that a lot of the presence has been surveillance. And I'm not condemning all Ish people. I do want to say that because there is redemption for everyone who is repentant, or people who have no affiliation to this system that oppresses us. And so if you are someone that is of that persuasion, absolutely be repentant, get right with the Most High. But irregardless of where you stand, this is a commonality that we've noticed with certain groups who have used their political power and clout in order to go throughout the world and have standing to lord over our affairs. They've lorded over our affairs throughout our history, whether it's in the continent or in the diaspora. And if we're not clear about who our enemies are, we're going to keep allowing these types of infiltrations rapidly to happen inside of our community. So it goes on to say, among those whom the NAACP chairman Spingarn spied on was the family of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The Memphis Commercial Appeal states in its March 21st, 1993 edition the following: the intelligence branch of the United States Army spied on the family of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for 3 generations. Top secret, often illegal intrusions into the lives of Black Americans began more than 75 years ago and often focused on Black churches in the South and their ministers. The spying was born of a conviction by the Army intelligence officers that Black Americans were ripe for subversion. Are we ripe for subversion? That's a question that we have to contend with as a people. Dr. King was called anti-ish people by Birmingham Rabbi Milton Grafman. Now he said, this is a quote from Grafman, at this meeting, King kept referring to the merchants and the role of the merchants I told him in the city of Birmingham, when you talk about merchants, you might just as well use the word ish people. And that there was certainly an implied anti-ish peopleness here by the use of the word merchant. He kept harping on the radio, kept on harping in his talks, and everything was quoted in the newspaper about the merchants. The merchants, the merchants. Birmingham, you talk about the merchants. You're also talking about ish people. I brought out the fact that King's continual harping about merchants was implied, if not actually, anti-ish people-ness. Because in the city of Birmingham, everyone knew that the merchants were ish people. So you see the same exact thing happening back then as happens now. You can have someone who says something that has absolutely nothing to do with that community. And yet, that person will have to be called anti-ish people because they said something that offended them. Now, of course, we know the well-known saying, if someone throws a rock into a heap of dogs and you hear a dog cry out, only the hit dog hollers. So why are you feeling like we're calling you out when we're saying a general term like the merchants, which can be applied to many people, not one people are merchants. And yet you want to label Dr. King as anti-ish people for his use of that term. So let's jump down to get J. Edgar Hoover. It says, J. Edgar Hoover infamously commented that Dr. King could be the Messiah among the Black people if he gave up his obedience to the white liberal tutelage. No doubt it was the likes of ish people, liberal, and advisor to Dr. King, Stanley Levinson, that Mr. Hoover was making reference to as keeping Dr. King from becoming the Black Messiah. An FBI report states, Stanley Levinson has told Clarence Jones, among another advisor to King, that under no circumstances should King be permitted to say anything without their approving it. How controlled was Dr. King when you find out that these advisors were around him who were telling him what and what not to say? Now, according to Jeffrey Steinberg, in his Anti-Defamation League Caught in Spy scandal, the organization had a fear of loathing Dr. King. Steinberg notes, Henry Schwarzschild waited a long time to go public with his personal horror about how the Anti-Defamation League of Benia birthed. Today, an employee of the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, has resigned from a high-ranking position in the ADL's publicity office in the mid-1960s when he discovered, to his shock, that the ADL was spying on Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on behalf of J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. It was not until the spring of 1993, nearly 30 years after he quit the ADL, that Schwarzschild came forward and told about the League's efforts against Dr. King. In April 28, 1993 interview, Schwarzschild told San Francisco Weekly, they, the ADL, thought King was a loose cannon. He was a Baptist preacher and nobody could be quite sure what he would do next. The ADL was very anxious about having an unguided missile out there. This shocking overview of the secret relationships between Dr. King and his ish people opponents affords us the ability to put Minister Farrakhan's opposition to ish people in proper perspective. Here's something that I want us to understand. The reason I wanted to talk about this again, I did mention last week that the ADL has a history of spying on Dr. King. I wanted you to get more details of that. But I also wanted you to remember every single time that we have this idea used against us, that, these people also participated in the civil rights movement. You should thank them. Something that people have been saying a lot. I mean, I remember with the discourse around Kanye West, a lot of people were saying, don't you know that these people fought for your rights, right? We have to understand that surveillance is affirmatively working for the state that oppresses us. Surveillance can never be sugar-coated to be assistant. Surveillance is literally acting for our downfall. And so if a people have been consistently found in a position of surveilling us, that people have been against us and conspiring against us. The other thing I want to note from this article, you see with Dr. King and with many other leaders, some things have not changed. The role is to control what we can and cannot talk about. You can say whatever you want, Kanye West. You can do whatever you want. You can say whatever you want about Harriet Tubman. You can say whatever you want about slaves. You can say whatever you want about anyone. But you cannot go outside of these lines. If you go outside of these lines, you will be erased. And I don't even know if the person that's walking around with Kanye West, I don't even know if that's Kanye West anymore since that whole scandal happened. So there are real affirmative actions being taken to control our discourse, to control our ability to talk about what our actual problems are, to control our ability to organize, control our ability to change our realities. And it's very consistent that a certain group has been used and many times on the forefront are the one who has been sicking the FBI on us, sicking J. Edgar Hoover on us. A certain group has been used against their community, and we have to be very clear who our enemies are and who they are not. So I wanted to bring this to you all. I did bring this up to my Telegram channel, and I felt like this is something that YouTube also has to hear, because don't be confused on who your enemies are and who your friends are. If that's anything we have to learn, we have to study our enemies, how they act, how they conduct themselves, and what their aims are. What means of communication do they try to restrict? Because these things are only going to repeat and repeat and repeat until they get their perceived end as far as what they want to achieve against our people. So with that, everyone, I thank you all for joining me. Y'all willing, will be back with you next week.
Inside Washington's Museum of the Bible, a single volume that is like no other. The so-called Slave Bible, remarkable not for what's in it, but for what's not.
So about 90% of the Old Testament's been removed, and about 50% of the New Testament's been removed. To put it another way, a normal King James Version has 1,189 chapters in it. The Slave Bible has only 232.
Missing are chapters and verses that might have encouraged uprisings. Book of Exodus, redacted. No story of Moses demanding Pharaoh, "Let my people go." Gone is Galatians, and the verse, "There is neither bond nor free, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus." And no Jeremiah, "Woe unto him that useth his neighbor's service without wages."
What they've left in are verses such as Ephesians 6:5, which is the famous verse, "Slaves, be obedient to your master."
Looking at this
This is First African Baptist Church, the oldest black church in North America. The building, built by slaves. The gentleman that laid the first brick laid the last. The balcony hold pews that actually were built by slaves. They have the oldest information in this building. That information is written in cursive Hebrew writing.
Something came to us earlier about who we were, and that we were direct descendants. My family is direct descendants from Harriet Tubman, and she's from the same area that this tribe is visiting Philadelphia from. And so we had to come and worship with you guys today. And we're super excited. It's just a thrill right now to be a part of this whole celebration.
And so, brother and sister, what was Harriet Tubman's name before she changed her name to Harriet? And what significance does that have to us as Hebrews?
Her name was, before she changed her name after she ran away, her name was Araminta Ross. And Araminta is a Hebrew name. Her family knew that they were from the Ashanti tribe, and which is now part of Ghana, and that they were Hebrew. They did have Hebrew names before they were in slavery.
Thank you so much.
And as we read a little bit, you can find the Ashanti tribe actually in the Old Testament. The Ashant, I believe, is Ashant, which is now interpreted in Shantae. So yeah, so it was really exciting to find someone that is actually our descendant who is Hebrew, and from right out of the book.
Harriet Tubman became known as the Moses of her people due to her contributions in facilitating the Underground Railroad. What is often not taught regarding Harriet is that she was given a Hebrew name at birth. Additionally, many of her relatives carried names of Hebrew origin. Harriet's birth name was Aramanita, which is a given name in Hebrew meaning lofty, noble, or elevated in character and spirit. Here we have provided a short list of a few of her relatives, along with the meaning of their names in Hebrew. Harriet's sister, Lina, Hebrew name meaning dwelling or lodging. Harriet's sister, Maria, Hebrew name meaning Yahuwah has said, or Yahuwah is my teacher. Harriet's brother, Ben, Hebrew name meaning son, with the full rendering Benjamin, meaning son of my right hand. Harriet's sister, Rachel, Hebrew name meaning ewe, or little lamb. Harriet's brother, Moses, name meaning to deliver or to draw out. Harriet's niece, Keziah, Hebrew name generally understood as meaning sweet scented spice. Through the collaborative efforts of researchers at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute of Harvard University, and other research institutions around the world, the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database has already provided empirical evidence that thousands of the men, women, and children who were transported from the shores of Africa had names of Hebrew origin. Though the slave owners deliberately stripped away much of their language and customs, we can still see evidence that our forefathers, who were led away into captivity, maintained some recollection of their heritage and identity.